Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm back from my long vacation trip. And before we get started with this interview, I'd like to invite you all to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Book Peddler. Stay up to date on book picks, book hauls, in-store activity, and hopefully more interviews like this one to come. I'm still in my Florida colors, though I was told it's not a true Florida shirt because it has long sleeves, so I'll have to take the scissors to it before I head back. This interview is with Michael Slicker. He's the owner of Lighthouse Books out in St. Petersburg, Florida, and he is in transition to move the shop. So I'm going to link up all his links, his YouTube links, and his website, so you can follow Michael if you're on vacation sometime down in Florida. If you live down in the area, I highly recommend you check him out. He's a very knowledgeable man. He's very welcoming to me. I've learned from him throughout the years, and please go support his channel and support his work and buy some books off him. With all that being said, I hope you enjoy the interview and stay tuned for more to come. How's everyone doing out there? It's Phil Monteleone, the Book Peddler, and I'm sitting here with Michael Slicker. He runs Lighthouse Books in St. Petersburg, Florida, and you've been doing it for over 50 years.
Yeah.
He's been generous to let me interview him. I've actually followed Michael when I first opened up my shop. I would watch his videos, which I will link up below. There's a lot of valuable information in there that's helped my progression in learning about book business and what to look for in general. So I'll link up his site and his videos. And again, I appreciate you being here. This is my first interview. Thank you, Michael. Well, could you give me a brief background as to how you got started?
Sure. Actually, I got started when I was in graduate school. Actually, I had originally planned to teach special education.
Really?
And I got about halfway through the course study and realized that I really didn't have the patience to do all that. And at that point, I could drink coffee and talk to people and read. And when those are your main attributes, you got to figure out. maybe I'll be in a bookstore.
I see. You always have loved reading? Did you grow up around books, and were your parents?
Well, I've always been a reader, yes.
Gotcha. Any particular type of book that genre-wise? Or
Well, no, I've read a little bit of everything, but I've always enjoyed history. And then when it got time to raise children, I moved from California to back home to warm water.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's pretty nice out here, man. You picked a good spot.
And originally we were down by the water, which is how come we're Lighthouse Book.
Gotcha. That was my next question. Is what was the lure for you for Antiquarian books?
Well, initially, and all of people of a particular age did a sort of apprenticeship with another bookstore, oftentimes. And actually, in my case, I became a partner in sort of a general used bookstore.
Okay.
And did that for several years, but gradually I got more and more interested in the older things. And so I sold my interest in that store and went to work for an antiquarian bookseller.
Gotcha.
And that's where I got the initial learning.
You got the bug from that, huh?
Yeah.
That's
right,
awesome.
yeah.
So from when you started, how has the market changed when it comes to the older books? Is it flatline? Is there still a demand for the older books? How's it changed with the internet?
Well, first of all, the market is always changing.
Mm-hmm.
What is popular today may be the result of a television show or a centennial or something like that. It may be that a particular movie is just played and people are looking for those books. So the market is always changing in minor ways and in greater ways also. Today, many books have barcodes on the back, and those books are plummeting in value.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy just to run a wand on it. You have a description, you upload that, and a guy like me who's tapping along can't possibly compete with that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the other side of it is true also. Books that don't have barcodes on them or ISBN numbers. The big guys, the guys who have millions of books, have a hard time competing with little guys like me. And so that's one way it has changed. Another way is that Google and some of the places like that have scanned an awful lot of volumes. And so in many cases, what we call ephemera, posters, pamphlets, brochures, haven't yet been scanned. And so that value has not decreased. In fact, it has appreciated pretty rapidly.
Are people still collecting books?
Without question.
Yeah.
And one of the surprising things here, I mean, we are a general antiquarian shop, so we see a lot of different kinds of people. But in today's market, we see a lot more people who are under the age of 40 than people who are over the age of 40.
Oh, really? That's encouraging, huh?
Yes, it is. Yeah. It really is. And when we have our annual book fair here in St. Petersburg, there are times when we hear people muttering because the aisles are clogged with people with baby strollers.
Oh my, that's a good thing.
Yeah, it is.
It's awesome.
It's wonderful.
Well, what's your favorite thing about owning a bookstore? You've been in business for, tell me again.
A long time. Well, Lighthouse Books has been around for about 45 years.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was in the business before then. And I tell people all the time I got into the business because of the books, but I stayed because of the people.
Yeah, same for me.
And I've had a great life, truly. I always surrounded by wonderful ideas and beautiful things and interesting people.
Yeah.
The people who come through the door have already used up, in most cases, the normal channels of information. And so whether they know something about model railroads or dolls or some particular author, whatever it happens to be, they already know a lot. And if you just ask them something, you learn just the most outrageous stuff.
So since it's predominantly it's an antiquarian bookstore, is there any reference guides or anything that you have utilized or do utilize to help you know what you got or values or just information and general information when anything particular stand out?
Well, regardless of your specialty, and I do, well, people do recommend that you have a specialty. In our case, my attention span is so limited that we got off the path here.
Okay.
But we do emphasize Florida and the Caribbean. But the point is, whatever your emphasis or your specialty is, you need to have the bibliographies for that area. In our case, there's a multi-volume set of Florida history. It's a bibliography.
Gotcha.
And there are all sorts of bibliographies that are available. I heartily recommend that whether you're a collector or a bookseller or maybe just an interesting person, that you get the proper bibliographies, and also that a number of booksellers over the years have written their memoirs, and I suggest people read every one of them because you just pick up a little tidbit here or there.
I'm sure.
And they're interesting books to read.
Oh, I'm sure. That was actually another question that I had for you about specializing in a particular field. Would you recommend that if you're just starting out? Do you think most...
Well, I'll answer it in a different way. It is true that a good collection takes on, and I have mentioned this in one of the YouTube things, it sort of takes on a sort of spherical shape with the high points at the center of the sphere. And what happens is you can take out that and sort of put it in the reference or the knowing about that particular subject. There are high points, and then there's the sort of pyramid shape with the foundation of it. Now what happens is, once you know one subject, once you've got one of those spheres down, you can apply the rules of it to any other subject.
It crosses over.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the high points, the important things, will always be at the top, and in many cases they can be used in different subjects. And so once you figure out what makes something important, you then can apply that, whether you're talking about from history to literature to children's books, whatever. Once you know what makes a book important, then you can apply it to any place. One of the great things about the book business is nobody ever knows everything.
You're always learning.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
That's the fun of it too.
Exactly. Exactly. And it takes a sort of a curious person to want to jump into it.
So the type of books that you kind of specialize in, you said before, it's mostly Florida. Is that in maps? You do maps as well?
Yes, yes. I had this fantasy. I used to do, and still do, a fair number of book fairs. And so I'd take 40 or 50 boxes to a book fair. And as I got older, somehow or another the boxes got heavier.
Okay.
So my fantasy was, well, what we'll do is we'll pare down these books, and I'll start doing more and more of these maps over here because they're lighter.
There you go. Yeah.
But what happened is I then had the same number of books, and I added the maps.
So you really didn't help yourself at all. All right. Good initial idea. You know what I'm curious about is, and I asked you it earlier, but on how book scouts used to operate and how people used to buy before there was a computer, like catalogs and whatnot. How did that process work? Because you had to go through that.
Well, at the basic, things haven't changed much. I mean, you always went to the estate sales and the library sales and all of that sort of thing, and picked up books and information along the way. There was, and you visited other bookstores, and so back in the day, if one of my Florida authors is Marjorie Kennan Rollins, I have customers for it, but somebody in Kansas might not. So whenever I was on the road, I would always visit all the bookstores, because the guy in Kansas had a different price on Rollins than I could get.
Yeah.
With the internet, everything has sort of become homogenized, and a lot of that fun has disappeared. We also did a lot of trading. I do Florida and Caribbean, of course, mainly. But somebody in Atlanta might like Georgia material better than Florida material, so we would trade all the time. And that's how a lot of it happened. We would also, there were times when 2 or 3 or half a dozen of us would pile in a car and go visit all the bookstores in the area, and at the end of the day say, oh, what did you find? And that's share information and what we did. And the guy who was the king for the day, he might buy beer for everybody.
There you go. That's awesome. Sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
A lot of fun. So would you go to different states? You ever do any of that?
Not so much I mean, I might go to a different state and go around with people, but we never did much traveling that way, although a lot of people did.
Yeah.
And in fact, some libraries, like Yale, for instance, had a librarian that they sent out and looked at bookstores all around.
Purchase on their behalf.
Yes.
And whatnot.
Yes, exactly.
That's really neat. Really neat. How many book scouts are out there anymore? Are people still doing it pretty actively?
Yeah, there's still people who do it pretty regularly. Not so much that way anymore, because rather than bring books to me, for instance, there are other channels. You can go to your estate sales and then put books on eBay or what have you.
Yeah.
So there's less of that going on now than there used to be.
What's kind of neat is what so I found in this shop the New York State Fish and Game, the portfolio. And so down here there might not be as much interest, but I'm in New York, so it's like a no-brainer.
There you go.
You know, so that's how I've been kind of doing it. And,
Mm-hmm.
I love it because I didn't expect to find that here,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a cool portfolio, and I'll definitely have a buyer lined up probably back home. So is that kind of how you would work it as well?
Absolutely.
Then you kind of got to.
While we're on the subject,
Yeah.
it used to be that because the internet was not available, you know, Mrs. Smith or Mr. Wilson would come in and say, "Oh, I've been looking for such and such a book."
Yes.
And so we had little pieces of paper, and they would fill them out, and we'd get a bunch of them together, and then once a week or once a month, we would make a list of those things. We would type it up and send it off to the trade publication that was called the AB, or the Bookman's Weekly. And they would charge 35 cents a line or something and they would publish that. It was a weekly publication.
I see, yeah.
And then all the bookstores around the country, or all the book scouts around the country, would go in, and there'd be a list. It was just lists of books.
Wow.
And so you look at your list and go to your shelf and see if you had the book.
I see.
If you had the book, then you'd do up a postcard, a 3x5 card, and address it and stamp it and send it off to the person on the other end, and he or she would, over the next week or so, gather up all those postcards and choose the one that seemed like the best condition at the best price. And they'd then mail off a check to whatever bookstore had offered that.
Gotcha.
And then that person on the other end would package up the book and mail it to that person. And he or she, once it had arrived, would give Mr. Smith and Mrs. Wilson a call and say, "Your book is here and it's such and such a price." The whole process, from the time that the person gave you the title to when they actually had it in hand, was probably about 90 days. So you can see that things have sped up a little.
Very fast. So that catalog was like the middleman, and they sent out to the store. That's really neat. God, what a different world, huh?
Yes.
Any aspect of it you miss, or was it more of a headache at times?
Well, it was interesting to see. It gave you, if you read through the pages of AB, it lets you know what the trends were and who was a hot
different
author.
Interest levels there. Yeah, that's awesome. You still have some of those little catalogs?
No. And actually, that was a periodical, a magazine that came out weekly. Yes, we still do have, which was the other thing. If I got together and over the course of weeks or months, maybe years, you'd put together a collection of something. It could be Western Americana, whatever. And you'd put together an interesting group of books and then issue a catalog. You'd mail out the catalog to libraries and collectors and what have you, and they on the other end would look at the thing and give you a call and say, "Is numbers 1133 and 55 still available?"
I see.
You'd say, "Yeah, okay," and then you'd mail those off or wait for the check, depending on.
Pretty cool. Very different.
Very different.
A lot more time consuming, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, knowing what you know now in starting a shop, is there anything that you would have done differently? I mean,
probably one of the first things I would have done was take a business course.
Okay, yeah.
Accounting or something like that.
Oh man, it's a horrible aspect, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Horrible. So yeah, I guess I could definitely say the same. What's one of the most important things that you think? Like, location obviously is pretty important, but is that necessarily as important with the internet? Is there any advice basically you could give somebody that wants to open their own bookstore starting out?
That's a hard question. Because of the internet,
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot fewer bookstores than there used to be. And a lot of that has to do with a bookstore requires overhead.
Yeah.
And there's insurance and maybe an extra rent or mortgage,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And you know, an extra telephone bill and an extra light bill and on and on and on. So there are a lot fewer bookstores than there used to be. From my point of view, it's always been a good thing to have an open shop, because your customers are more willing to come in and take a look or let you know what their interests are. And by the same token, somebody who has books that they might like to offer for sale are more willing to come to an open bookstore than they are to somebody's house or
Absolutely.
basement,
Absolutely.
that kind of thing. And so it's always paid dividends for us in both aspects of that.
So do you think the pros outweigh the cons?
In my mind, they do.
Yeah.
That's not true of everybody.
Yeah.
A lot of people think differently.
Yeah. Most will probably say, don't even start one. Actually, everybody told me that before I did, and I can understand why. Though it's a tough business.
Mm-hmm.
What do you know offhand? What the oldest book is you've ever had in this shop?
Book or thing are two different questions
Mm-hmm.
for starters. And yes, we've had some illuminated manuscript leaves from 1200s.
Yeah.
We have had some early books. We have one in stock right now that's from the 1473.
Wow.
It's interesting to think about. It was a used book when Columbus came.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much all the questions I have. Is there anything particular that you'd like to say to close it out? Anything?
No, I would. The only thing I would say is, Phil, you will enjoy your life. You really will.
Hey, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it, Mike.